prosecution's closing statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. There is no more difficult or solemn task a prosecutor is given than to stand in front of 12 members of the community and ask each of you to impose a sentence of death. It's solemn and it's heavy, and the decision's not a simple one, much like the decision you made in the guilt phase. Nor should it be simple. But like the decision you made in the guilt phase, the decision you make in this phase centers around accountability. Accountability gives meaning to life. It gives meaning to the lives of Summer, Joseph, Gianni, and Joe Jr. When a crime is so horrible that it literally tears, as Mr. Imes said, at the fabric of society, when it's so enormous, when it's so brutal, when it's so horrible, and when it's so senseless, the only right decision is to remove the person who made that tear from society. Make no mistake about it, I'm asking you to do that in this case. Without hesitation. This is that kind of case. As Ms. Rodriguez said in an opening statement, the death penalty is meaningless if it's not imposed in this case. Now, we don't get an opportunity for rebuttal, as we did in the first phase. I'm sure you're grateful for that. So we do have to address all of the factors, as you have to consider all of the factors. And what you're likely to hear is a lot of discussion regarding lingering doubt. What you're likely to hear is, hey, we agree. Joe is a great guy. Nothing bad we could say about him. But you know what? Each of you got it wrong. They may not say that in those words, but that's what they're going to say. Each of you who sat through this trial, 5 months, give or take, of evidence, who deliberated, considered, compared, and contrasted that evidence, and reached a decision beyond a reasonable doubt that he murdered 4 people. Make no mistake about it, regardless of what language is used, they're saying you got it wrong. That's what that lingering doubt is. Because each of you have done your job, and it's offensive to the attention you've paid in this case, and what you've invested in this case, and the time you spent back there deliberating and deciding this case. That's what's really being said. You got it wrong. What if you got it wrong? Okay? Each of you know, beyond a reasonable doubt, that's the murderer. When I stood here January 7th and gave you an opening statement, I was going to tell you the most important thing in this case that the evidence was going to show you was who did it. And you all agreed 10 days ago, or a little bit more, he did it. The decision now is what's appropriate. What's the appropriate punishment? Make no mistake about it, you're not in this position because of bad prosecutors. You're not in this position because of bad police. You're not in this position because of the DA's ego, or the police's ego, or pride, or anything else. You are here because he murdered 4 people. You're here because of his actions, because of his greed, because of his choices. To suggest otherwise, to suggest that you are here because of our ego or our pride is irresponsible, it's not true, and you know it. We're here because of him. You're here because of him. My role here, as Mr. Imes told you, is to discuss an equally important factor with regards to factor A. Mr. Imes did a job of describing for you the brutality of what happened that night, February 4th. But your consideration in this phase of the trial is not limited to what happened February 4th. It's not limited to The brutality of bashing someone's skull in, of bashing a child's skull in, and another child's skull in, of beating Summer so bad that her skull was in multiple pieces. It's not limited to that. Because the brutality of what happened that night continues to right now, this day. You saw the effects of the brutality this morning with Miss Russell testifying. It continues this day for this family. And you can consider that. And ladies and gentlemen, that makes this crime enormous. If you think about the butterfly effect, you may have heard that in popular culture. That's something small happens here, and something huge happens over here as a result of something small here. Well, certainly this murder was not small. These murders were not small, but the impacts are still huge, and they're still felt today. You felt them when they were testifying, and you can consider that. Because make no mistake about it, Susan Blake, Patrick McStay, Michael McStay, Blanche Aranda, Kenneth Aranda are all victims. Tracy Russell, a victim. Jonah, the now adult son of Joseph, a victim. Still feeling the effects. The evidence you heard from us was what we call victim impact evidence. The purpose of that is to show you the specific harm caused by him. The specific harm he did and still does to this family, to their loved ones. That is a circumstance of the crime every bit as important as those hammers to the head and those broken bones found in the desert. The purpose of that evidence is to show you his moral culpability and to show you the destruction that he wrought on this family.
Here's Chubba. Hi, Chubba. Santa Claus came. A week late for us. How nice of him, huh? Hi, Chubba. Merry Christmas.
No, Mama. Chubba, Nick. Now.
Oh, okay. Let's go, Papa.
Before we start opening our presents, I want to just say that I'm very, very happy that we're all healthy this time, that we get to celebrate our Christmas together, because we've been so sick, and we're really grateful.
No, Mama. Chubba, now.
Okay, so I just want to say that.
Okay.
Merry Christmas, baby. I love you.
Merry Christmas, Chubbs.
Good job.
Big brother John on your butt, dude.
Yeah.
That's funny.
You gotta get a picture of them both going like this.
Chubba.
Wow.
Hi, Chubba.
Here's Chris Shed calling come. I don't know if that's for Chubba, though.
Georgie.
Chubba,
Who wants to be first? No, not me.
Yes, you.
Well,
Give up.
Those voices. Those voices that you heard, finally, during this phase of the trial. Their voices will never be heard again. And that's for one reason. Because he murdered them. The family members who testified for you experience and feel that loss every day. They will never get to hear those voices. You may have noticed something. Get the right slide here. During the testimony in this case, the family members, when they were asked, tell me about your loved one. Even Miss Russell this morning, who was quite emotional via FaceTime, when was asked that question, they lit up in a smile. They lit up when they talked about the memories that they had. How many memories were robbed from them by him? how much more would they be smiling and laughing at their experience if it wasn't for him? What is the impact from the loss of Joseph? The evidence in this case. Joseph won't be there to be proud of his little brother. If you recall the testimony, even on the altar, at the altar as he was being married, he said C-16, because that was the contractor license that his little brother just got. So in that very moment that should have been about him, it was about his brother, and that will never happen for him again. Joseph won't be there to know Mike's bonus kids. He won't be there to share his common interests with Mike's little curly-headed nephew, well, Joe's curly-headed nephew, who shared similar interests, skateboarding, video, that kind of thing. He's not there. What's the impact of that? How do you measure that? He wasn't there to make his backyard a playground for his boys in a house, his first house that he bought. And they were so excited to get out of the small apartment in San Clemente and get a big yard that they could play in. He's not there to do that.
They feel the loss like I do, like we all do. Not to have their Uncle Joey around, Uncle JoJo. Not to get to play. I mean, you think about it, the boys would be 15 and 14-ish right now. I mean, how much fun would we all be having? And just memories. They're going to miss all of those things. They're not going to see, Boy Scouts or whatever the boys are going to be into. They're not going to get to share those life moments, which are the most valuable things that we have.
Those life moments were taken. That's a factor in aggravation. He took it. That was taken from this family forever. Summer won't be around to spring one-liners like she did at her wedding. She won't be there to give clever quips. She won't be there to teach her sons, her sister, her nephews, how to walk with purpose and a passion, like Miss Russell told you this morning. She won't be there to bring her brother Kenneth to the mainland every year to keep the family tight, to keep them together. She can't share her favorite inspirational books with Kenneth or with Tracy, her love of reading, the love of her lifestyle. I forget what the phrase was this morning, but it was a funny one. She won't get to share that with them anymore. She won't be there to give gifts on special occasions. If you watch that Christmas video, Jonah says, "You should open yours first, Summer." And she goes, "Me, no, I like giving them." She won't be there to do that for her family. She never got to meet her nephews, her nephew, Tracy's son. So much of life was taken by him, beyond a reasonable doubt. And when you think about Summer, what's the one common word at least 3 of the 4 witnesses presented in this phase used about Summer? Protective. Mike said it, Susan said it, Kenneth said it. I don't believe Miss Russell, Tracy Russell said it this morning, but protective. What was going through Summer's mind that night? When she knows she can't protect her boys anymore. The one thing everybody described her as was Mama Bear. What was going through her mind in that moment when he entered their house and started this evil, evil act? That's a factor in aggravation. What went through her mind when this evil was being done, or when she knew that it was going to be done to them, and there was nothing she could do to stop it? How do you measure or quantify the loss of a child? There's a quote from a movie, I'm paraphrasing, it's not really a quote, called The Unforgiven, and Clint Eastwood says, it's a hell of a thing to kill a man. You take away everything they are and everything they are going to be. How do you measure the loss, the murder of two little boys like this? What could they have been? What could they have added, if not to society, to their family? Gianni with his love of reading and dinosaurs. And Chubba with his energy. What is the impact of the loss of these two little boys with a backyard so excited that they could play in? What is the loss of little children to their family? To grandmothers. Blanche, who, as Tracy said this morning, can't gather the pieces of this loss. To Susan, Blake. How do you measure that? No first day of kindergarten. No reading with them. No seeing them catch their first wave. No seeing them play soccer. No seeing them go through junior high and being awkward and starting high school and having their first crush. None of that. The grandparents, Patrick McStay, Susan Blake, Blanche Aranda, don't get that. And they don't get that because he took it from them. That's a factor in aggravation. And it outweighs any lingering doubt they pretend to make up for you. Their aunts, their uncles, their cousins who don't get to play with them. They don't get to see them find their way in the world. How do you measure the impact of that? How do you give dignity and meaning to that? Those voices were silenced at the hands of Charles Merrick.
Invisible. They were little boys in a fantasy world. And they did everything with their parents and us in parks and Legoland, and they didn't know fear. They didn't know to be scared. They didn't know hurt. They just were in this fantasy world and never get to see them grow up or talk to them. I go to the gravesite to talk to them. I got to bury them all together, so sorry.
Those two little boys who didn't know fear and didn't know to be scared and didn't know pain and didn't know hurt until he showed up at their door. They didn't know any of that until that night. They lived in their fantasy world until he showed up. A verdict of death by each of you is not barbaric. It's not petty, and it's not about revenge. A verdict of death, in this case, in a very real sense, and in the only sense that we can, begins to put that fabric back together. to not give a death verdict is an injustice in this case. The death penalty is meaningless if it's not given in light of these factors in aggravation. A verdict of death brings meaning and dignity to those lives and to the lives that are still affected by this. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, the circumstances in aggravation outweigh the circumstances in mitigation, if any. There's no question. And they are substantial in comparison to any potential mitigating factors. You didn't get this wrong. You got this right. So, on behalf of the people of the state of California, I'm asking you to begin to repair the fabric. I'm asking you to hold him accountable for what he did. I'm asking you to bring meaning and dignity to the lives that were lost. And the only way to do that in this case is to render a verdict of death. And I'm asking you to do that without hesitation or reservation. Thank you very much.
Normally, we would take a brief recess before the defense begins their closing statement. Unfortunately, I have a dentist appointment later this afternoon, so we would need to recess a little bit after 3. So would defense prefer to start this afternoon, or would you prefer to start fresh and go straight through without being interrupted tomorrow?
That would be our preference.
Tomorrow?
Yes.
That's fine. All right, so we'll go ahead and take our afternoon or our evening recess a little bit early at this time till 9:30 tomorrow morning. Again, keep in mind the admonition is given to you not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case, including not discussing anything about the arguments or the attorneys or any of the evidence, and of course, not to read anything about the case or watch anything about the case on TV. You've heard it all here firsthand. You don't need to see a replay of part of it. So we'll see everyone back 9:30 tomorrow morning. Record reflect all of the jurors have left. Counsel and parties are still present. In the penalty phase, the people utilized exhibit, I think it was 1160, yes, and various subparts of that. Have all of the subparts of 1160 been utilized?
No, and that's why I'm making sure the exhibit conforms with the proof.
Okay, so you'll have...
we can finalize that tomorrow morning.
Okay, so you'll have a CD that 1160, maybe we'll call it 1160A, that will contain only the segments that were actually utilized.
It will remain 1160.
Okay.
The way we have it formatted.
Okay, that's fine. All right, then we'll finalize that tomorrow morning, and then we'll see everyone else 9:30 tomorrow morning.
Okay. Thank you.
So you can bring it back.